The USDA just released the latest trade data, and we have our good friend Derrell Peel here to talk about it. And Derrell, let's go through the numbers. Let's start with import beef.
You know, we expected going into the year that beef imports would be higher. It's been down the last couple of months, was slightly down in this latest data for the month of July. And for the year to date, we're actually down a little over 2%. So, you know, depending on what happens here for the rest of the year, we won't see much of an increase, or perhaps even come in a little bit lower. You know, we're seeing an increase still in imports from Australia and Canada. But in this most recent month's data, New Zealand data was New Zealand imports were down significantly.
Wow, that's crazy. So let's talk the beef leaving the U.S. How are those numbers looking?
Almost the same story, but in reverse. Obviously, we're looking for an increase in exports. We didn't expect to see that on an annual basis, and we're not sure yet. But again, for the year to date, we've got an increase of a little over 2% in beef exports. For the month of July, total beef exports were up almost 15%. You know, the big leader there has been Japan. We've seen a rapid growth in exports of beef to Japan since about February or March, when they changed their import regulations relative to the age of beef cattle that were acceptable. We're also seeing increases to Mexico the last couple of months. That's been a nice change. Our exports to Mexico have declined almost continuously since 2008, but in the last 2 months we've seen a turnaround in that. We're seeing more beef exports back to Mexico.
Okay, from beef to cattle, what are we seeing as far as importing cattle?
You know, we import cattle from both Mexico and Canada into the U.S. From Canada, it's a mix of slaughter cattle as well as feeder cattle that go into feedlots. The Canadian numbers are up a little bit, but in terms of feeder cattle in particular, it's a small component of their total. Mexico is the biggest source of feeder cattle imports into the U.S. Last year's numbers were second highest ever at almost 1.5 million head, but it fell off at the end of the year, and so far this year we've seen a dramatic reduction. We're down year to date from Mexico about 46%. In July, we actually imported less than half as many cattle as we did a year ago in July. And so we're going to end the year significantly lower, perhaps down as much as close to 50% for the whole year.
Okay, so what does that mean for the U.S. cattle herd?
Well, feeder supplies of cattle have been getting tighter in the U.S., as you know, and of course one component of that is the Mexican and Canadian cattle imports. Mexican cattle imports represent about 4 to 5% of our total feeder cattle supplies. So we lose, you know, up to half of that. We could be talking about an additional 3% or 2 to 3% in reduced feeder cattle supplies. That'll really further squeeze the availability of cattle, particularly with respect to volumes of cattle to go into the feedlots and packing plants.
Okay, there you go. Derrell Peel, Livestock Marketing Specialist here at Oklahoma State University.